They say there are plenty of fish in the sea, but Andy Nash always seemed to come up empty-handed.
I was 34. I had had a series of relationships. I was engaged twice, but nothing had really stuck. Nothing seemed to work out.
So by June of 2008, the Minneapolis local decided she was done fishing in shallow waters.
I think Andy was looking for a life mate, someone she could be in a long-term relationship with.
And one day that month, Andy got her first bite.
A friend of mine who was doing some online dating came across a profile that she thought I'd like.
Andy joined the website and soon found herself browsing the profile named Loving a Full Life.
His name is Simon Reed. There was a picture of him with a dog, and he was handsome, and I believe it said he was looking for a serious relationship.
Ready to test the waters, Andy sent Simon a brief message, and just days later, she got a response that had her grinning from ear to ear.
He just sent me a quick, friendly email saying, I'd love to get together for tea or something sometime. We ended up arranging to meet, and we actually met at a pub. I felt like for a first date, there was a lot of chemistry.
The attraction seemed mutual, as Simon opened up about events from his past.
He had been married before in England, and he said he had been in the States about 7 years.
Simon told Andy that he owned part of a construction company. He was very charming, very friendly, outgoing, very easy to get along with.
Simon seemed like a great catch. And as the following week went by, Simon and Andy began making plans for a second date. When suddenly Simon called with shocking news.
A drunk driver had apparently plowed through his fence and hit the front of his house. He was pretty frustrated about all the damages and the construction work they'd have to do. In the meantime, he was going to be staying with a friend of his.
Even without a roof over his head, Simon continued to court Andy. Just days later, he took her on a romantic picnic.
When we got in his truck at the beginning of the second date, he handed me a letter. In the letter, Simon said that he hadn't felt a connection like this with anyone in a long time. And the letter closed with, I know it's a bit early and we don't know each other that well, but I really feel like I'm falling in love with you. I was starting to fall for him in a big way as well.
For Andy, this was the whirlwind romance she'd been waiting for. But Simon would prove to be slippery when wet, and he would disappear from her life just as swiftly as he had entered it. 2 months later, in August of 2008, Andy Nash was beside herself with worry. She had been expecting Simon for dinner that night, but he was nowhere to be found.
I spent the night texting Simon, and the next day, I woke up, looked at my phone, no messages.
One day passed, and then another, with no word from Simon. He had disappeared for a day or two before, but to Andy, something about this time felt strangely different.
I had a feeling in the pit of my stomach that something horrible happened to him. He could be dead, he could be injured.
As the days passed, Andy had no idea if she would ever see her boyfriend again. Little did she know that fate was about to bring Simon back in the most unexpected way.
Nobody really had any idea what was going on.
I would have never thought something like this would happen to someone that I know.
In June of 2008, 2 months before Andy Nash's boyfriend Simon Reed went missing, her relationship with the handsome Englishman was in full swing.
The relationship with Simon was progressing really fast. He was right there with me, and he was always saying, how happy he was and how excited he was to have met me.
Simon seemed nothing short of perfect, and Andy delighted in showing him off to her close friends.
I thought he was completely charming, very outgoing, just an all-around, genuine, nice guy.
Andy looked forward to a summer of love. And And as the 4th of July weekend approached, Andy and Simon made plans to see the fireworks. But that evening, when Simon didn't show up, Andy became concerned.
Andy was worried, and she was kind of upset. She was afraid something happened to him because it was so out of character for him not to call.
I didn't hear from Simon until the next day. He called me, apologized profusely, and said that he actually had an accident at the work site. He had fallen from the roof of a building he was working on, and he had to go to the emergency room.
Although initially upset, Andy felt her anger melt away as Simon pleaded for her forgiveness.
I felt bad for him. I was like, I'm sorry I was so angry about it. I'm sorry that I overreacted.
And if Simon felt the need to apologize further, he let his wallet do the talking.
One day Simon showed up at my apartment and said, you know, I would like to take you shopping today. When all was said and done, he ended up spending $500.
As the hours turned into days, the charming boyfriend Andy had fallen for seemed to be back. But Simon wasn't done wowing Andy just yet. At dinner one night, he made a romantic confession.
Simon looked at me and said, you won't be my girlfriend forever. I am the marrying kind. And that was pretty much what I wanted to hear from him.
Andy thought she had finally hooked her perfect mate.
The relationship definitely was a whirlwind romance. I really felt like I was falling for him in a very short amount of time.
But just when everything seemed too good to be true, Simon's bad luck would strike once again.
Simon called me one day. He was frantic. His dog had just been hit by a car, and he was rushing his dog to the vet, just called me so I would know what was going on.
A dog lover herself, Andy understood Simon's heartache.
They were doing surgery on him, trying to save him. So it was pretty tense. I was pretty worried, and he was, texting me throughout the night.
Simon promised to check back in throughout the day. But as the hours rolled past, Andy received no further word from her man.
I texted him, just please get in touch, let me know what's happening. I'm worried about you, I'm worried about the dog.
Over a day later, after multiple unanswered messages, Simon finally resurfaced on Andy's doorstep. He looked exhausted, but Andy was ready for some answers.
I was pretty angry, and he was like, wait, back off a little bit. I can't handle being yelled at. I've had a horrible few days. And I said, look, I don't like you going silent like this. It kind of makes me panic.
Simon was very apologetic when Andy told him that he needed to communicate better, and, of course, he promised he would do so.
Simon Reed appeared to be a man of his word, but sometimes promises are impossible to keep.
I had no idea where he was. I didn't know what had happened. I just felt completely used.
We all had our own suspicions that something wasn't quite right.
By the summer of 2008, Andy Nash was once again consoling her boyfriend of 2 months, Simon Reed. Simon's latest emergency was an injured dog that had caused him not to return any of Andy's messages for almost 2 days.
He did seem to be genuinely sorry. He stayed over for a little bit, and he ended up having to leave early in the morning. He seemed to be really in a hurry.
But as dusk settled into night, Simon Reed was once again nowhere to be found.
The next day, I woke up, looked at my phone, no messages, no texts, and I thought, something definitely isn't right this time.
I was worried about him that something had happened, but given his track record, it just seemed really sketchy at that point.
When another day came and went without a peep from Simon, Andy's worry turned to anger.
I figured out I didn't know Simon Reed at all. I didn't know where he really lived. I didn't know a lot of things about him.
Andy wasn't sure what to think. Until a day later, when she got an answer she never expected.
My cell phone rang. There was a woman on the phone, and she said, "Is this Andy? Is Simon with you?" And I said, "No, I don't know where he is. I've been looking for him. Do you know anything?" And she said, no, I'm actually looking for him too. I'm Simon's wife. It was like being punched in the stomach. It was such a blow.
Andy tried to keep her composure as Simon's suspicious behavior suddenly became clear.
His wife said that on 4th of July, when he had supposedly fallen off a building, she and Simon had actually gone out of town to see some of her relatives that day.
Simon's wife also informed Andy that no drunk driver had ever crashed into their home, nor had their dog been involved in any sort of accident. It seemed that Andy's boyfriend was nothing more than a charming liar.
Andy called me crying, and I was in complete shock. I just kept thinking, how dare he? What kind of person does that to someone else?
All of a sudden, with one phone call, everything was over. It was a big shock to my system.
After a long cry and a big glass of wine, Andy decided the best way to get closure with Simon Reed was where their relationship started, online.
I'd had a blog going for quite a few years, so I took to my blog and I put up a picture of Simon and I said, this is Simon Reed, this is what he's done, just watch out for him. And it was very cathartic.
Andy hoped her blog would help other women wise up to Simon's lies. And just 9 months later, Andy would learn that her actions had indeed paid off.
One day I got a comment that said, my name is Joe, I live in England. I've actually just been done in by Simon Reed.
Also a victim of Simon's tall tales, Joe had come across Andy's blog during an internet search. As the two women exchanged emails, pieces of the Simon Reed puzzle began to fall into place.
He had fled to the UK after ditching me and his wife. And Joe was living in England, had met Simon, and she gave him money to start up his rock climbing business.
I offered him the use of my card, which people may consider foolish, but when you think you're getting married, at some point you share money and you share bank accounts, and that's what I thought we were doing.
But before Joe knew it, Simon had disappeared and taken around $26,000 of her money with him.
It was almost kind of a relief to have, oh, I'm not the only one that this happened to.
Both Joe and Andy wondered how many other women could be out there. And they wouldn't have to wait long. Another email was about to set an entire ambush plan in motion.
There was no hesitation for catching Simon.
The last thing he expected was to have these women find each other and come together and pounce.
By the summer of 2010, 2 years after Simon Reed had mysteriously disappeared on his girlfriend, Andy Nash, Andy had good reason to still be thinking about her ex.
I decided to put everything out there on my blog, and I got an interesting email from a woman in England called Jo. She had been swindled out of a lot of cash from Simon.
Joe's email had been shocking, but what came next was the biggest surprise of all.
The next time I heard from anyone, it was roughly about a year later. There was another comment on my blog from someone new named Nicola saying, oh my God, I think I'm dating this guy right now.
I thought Simon was a trustworthy guy until about maybe 3 weeks into our relationship. I started to think that I didn't really know who Simon was, and I decided that I would start to do an internet search. As soon as I put Minnesota and his name into the search engine, he popped up on Sandy's blog.
Since Nicola lived in England with Simon's current information, and Joe had been desperately trying to track him down, Andy introduced the two women over email.
Once Sandy gave me Joe's contact information, we chatted on the phone, and then we made a plan that we would meet up and somehow catch Simon out.
But before the women could begin hatching their plan, another shocking encounter would leave them speechless.
The friend that I'd been with the night I found Simon on the internet, she had spoken to her friend of hers, and her friend said, oh, hold on a minute, I think my friend is dating Simon too.
The woman's name was Laura, and not only was she dating Simon, but she lived right down the street from Nicola. With Joe's consent, Nicola immediately went to talk to Laura.
I took my camera and I said to her, I'll just show you a picture of me and Simon. And she just looked at the picture and she said, yeah, that's my Simon.
Nicola asked Laura if she would like to be involved in their plan to unmask Simon.
Laura was straight away, yeah, I want to be in on it. How could you do this to me?
The women knew that action was key if they wanted to catch the elusive Simon. That same night, their plan took shape.
We hatched a plan to meet Simon at Laura's house because she was due to see him the following night.
Nicola then arranged for a journalist friend to videotape the entire confrontation.
I was kind of wishing that I could be there too. It sounded very dramatic and exciting.
On August 5th, 2010, the women gathered at Laura's house in nervous anticipation of Simon's arrival.
My son sat in the car outside with the mobile and was warning us when he walked up the street.
Simon came in, I think he generally just let himself in, and she greeted him, with a normal kiss and, how's your day, darling? And she asked him to go through and put the kettle on.
But as Simon came through the kitchen door, he got the surprise of his life.
As he saw me, he just stopped in his tracks and just said, oh, hello.
Hello.
And then the cameraman said, is there anyone else that we should know about? And Simon said no. And then he heard footsteps behind him and he turned around to see Joe.
But you could see his heart beating quite a lot through his T-shirt. And I think really he just looked really pathetic. I paid £350 for your gym membership. I gave you 1,400 quid out of my credit card. I can't go on a holiday this year because I don't have any money.
As the women grilled Simon for the next 2 hours, the man who had once seemed impossible to pin down was now surprisingly stagnant.
He'd never once asked to leave in all that time. Simon said that he basically didn't know why he does the things that he does.
You're saying sorry to any of you, it's like stupid.
No, because you're not sorry.
I don't really know what the truth is from you.
Couldn't give us any answers. I suppose you want to think that you were the special one out of everybody there, that he must have loved you a little bit more than them, but he didn't.
He tries to keep us all happy by telling us things that we want to hear, knowing that he can't fulfill any of the things that he tells you he's going to do.
Other than being a liar, Simon claimed he was an innocent man.
Simon.
In November of 2010, Simon Reed was arraigned in Plymouth, England on fraud by deception charges. And in March of 2011, he was sentenced to 30 months in jail. Thousands of miles away, Andy Nash felt a sense of closure.
I feel that it's a just punishment. I can say that I hope he learns a lesson from it, but I don't really know if that's possible.
If you do
No,
love, don't do the stuff you do.
I don't think I know what love is.
Today, Andy Nash has moved well beyond Simon Reed.
I've learned from this experience, if someone seems too good to be true, they probably are.
More importantly, Andy didn't allow her experience with Simon to sour her search for a life partner.
I'm with a man now he's wonderful, he's charming, he's nice, but most importantly, he's not married.
Across the pond, Simon's other ladies have also moved forward.
I fought the credit card company. In the end, I probably lost about £5,000, so that's not as bad as 17,000, which is what it was.
I think the good things that came out of this, karma can catch up with anyone, so be careful.
Shayna Gibson never thought true love would find her so early.
I met Joe Alsop in 1989 when I was 4 and he was 6. He lived only 8 doors down from me and we became best friends.
Growing up outside San Antonio, Texas, Shayna and Joe spent their summers playing games and riding bikes till dusk.
Joseph lived in Oregon with his dad and he would only come down on summer breaks.
But all good things must come to an end. And in June of 1997, 12-year-old Shayna received disappointing news.
I had gone down to his mom's house and knocked on the door, and she answered, and she's like, "No, sweetie, they didn't come down this summer." She never really gave me any specific reason why he wasn't coming.
Shayna missed Joe, but just 1 year later, in the spring of 1998, Joe returned to Texas, and this time he was there to stay. But by Shayna's freshman year in high school, the once solid friendship had drifted apart.
Joe started changing as far as falling in with the wrong crowds and just hanging out with the wrong people.
So in December of 2002, after Joe's high school graduation, Shayna was pleasantly surprised to learn Joe was joining the Army.
It seemed like the structure of the military was really what he needed in his life in order to keep him functioning right.
Just as Joe departed for basic training, the childhood friendship rekindled. Meanwhile, Shayna took on the role of a lifetime when she delivered a baby boy named Zach from a previous relationship.
But Joe was always there. Even if he wasn't there physically, he was always calling or writing letters, letting me know, hey, if you need anything, I'm here for you.
A short time later, when Joe was deployed to Iraq, Shayna and Joe became frequent pen pals. Before long, something suddenly clicked, and the two realized their friendship had become much more.
We just decided that when he came home for his leave in November that we were going to spend time together, and come to find out, right before he'd left to go back, I was pregnant.
Joe and Shayna seemed to love each other, absolutely happy days.
Following Joe's stint in Iraq, the happy couple threw caution to the wind. And on April Fool's Day of 2004, a 4-month pregnant Shayna married her best friend, Joe.
We went to the courthouse, got our marriage license, went over to the Justice of the Peace, and 30 minutes later, we were married.
As the early days of married life rolled along, the newlyweds happily anticipated the birth of their first daughter.
We were very confident that it didn't matter what life brought us, that we were going to make it through it.
But life was hiding some dangerous secrets, and just 6 years later, a devastating series of events would threaten the very core of Shayna's fairy tale. By June of 2010, Shayna had a sneaking suspicion something was bothering her 7-year-old son, Zach.
Joe and I were fighting a lot, and I was scared that it would affect the kids.
So when Zach came home from school and went straight to his room, Shayna knew it was time for an intervention.
So then I just asked him, what was bothering him. And that's when he started telling me. And I knew without a shadow of a doubt, I had to believe my child. So I just picked up the phone and I called the cops.
But what Shayna learned was only the first layer of deceit. Something so horrific that nothing would ever be the same again.
I felt like something wasn't right, but I never would have guessed what was actually happening.
I felt like I was dying all over again.
In July of 2004, 6 years before Shayna Gibson would discover the unthinkable, she and her husband Joe Alsop were on top of the world.
We were happy. We decided that since we were having a girl, that it should be Daddy's little girl. So we gave her Joe's initials, Jade Elise Alsop.
And on August 6th, Shayna gave birth to a beautiful baby, Jade. But soon after Jade's arrival, Shayna's happiness turned to disappointment when Joe showed little interest in being a father.
He would either zone out and play video games, or he'd go to a friend's house and pretty much be gone all evening long.
Shayna hoped her husband was just going through a phase. But one early morning in November of 2004, Joe's detachment became outright alarming.
I noticed that the baby was just having a really hard time breathing. She was gasping for air, and Joe was more concerned on being to work on time than he was about the baby not breathing or having the high fever.
Shayna wasn't taking any chances and immediately drove Jade to the hospital.
They didn't have an explanation as to why she wasn't able to breathe that morning. They just said she had a virus and that they were going to go ahead and send her home.
Back home with her family, Shayna had high hopes her husband would start pulling his weight. But soon, Shayna's problems with Joe would take a back seat as she embarked on the worst night of her life. On January 27, 2005, Shayna Gibson headed out with a friend to run a quick errand.
I peeked in the room, checked on Jade. She looked to be sleeping just fine, and so I grabbed my friend Heather, got downstairs, got the car started.
But before they left the driveway, Shayna looked over to see Joe running down the stairs with baby Jade. In a state of disbelief, Shayna jumped out of the car and ran straight toward Joe.
By the time I got to the end of our staircase, Joe was down in the front yard with my daughter and was performing CPR on her because she wasn't breathing.
Neighbors flocked toward the chaotic scene as several people called 911.
EMS arrived and they were able to recover a heartbeat. So my neighbor, she says, "You're in no condition to drive, let me take you to the hospital." When we got to the emergency room, I ran inside and I told them who I was. I didn't even get to the room where my daughter was before the doctor stopped me and said, "We tried to save her." But it was already too late. And I just remember falling to my knees and screaming, "God, why me?" Joe sat right there in that trauma room with me and just cried and held her. The night that Jade passed, she was 5 months and 22 days old.
Despite her immense grief, Shayna needed answers. And in February of 2005, almost 1 month after Jade's death, her autopsy report came back from the lab. The results were inconclusive, but Shayna was troubled by one of the findings.
She had the petechiae around the neck and the capillaries. Petechiae is usually seen in strangulation, lack of air movement.
But when Shayna questioned authorities about her findings, she got nothing but closed doors.
I said, "Can you explain some of this to me?" And he says, "Well, we've already ruled her death or undetermined causes." He says, "There's really been no conclusion of foul play."
It seemed that Jade's file was closed for good. And as Shayna's unanswered questions only fueled her despair, Joe's behavior made things even worse.
I needed him to understand why I was hurting. He always just wanted me to deal with it on my own or call my mom. That was always his answer. "Just call your mom, she'll fix it."
Joe's distance was causing a strain on everyone. And Shayna couldn't help but wonder what was really bothering her husband.
Everybody I talked to was shocked. She fell to the floor and she was just crying.
And every day I woke up and I thought, this is a nightmare.
In the spring of 2005, Shayna Gibson's heart was broken after the sudden death of her 5-month-old daughter, Jade.
I was helpless. Nobody knew how to help me. Nobody could give me the hope that one day I might find out what happened to her.
To make matters worse, Shayna's husband and Jade's father, Joe Alsop, seemed to be grieving very differently, if at all.
Joe felt very cold to me, almost like he didn't have a heart anymore. He didn't know how to feel.
The intimate nights between Shayna and Joe had become few and far between. So in late April of 2005, Shayna wasn't at all prepared to learn she was once again pregnant.
I was devastated because I thought, how do I handle a child after just losing one?
That same day, Joe left for Iraq on his 3rd tour, and Shayna and her son Zach moved home to be closer to Shayna's mother.
I felt like he was gone and I didn't have any family up there to support me.
In November of 2005, Shayna delivered a baby boy named Joshua. 4 months later, Joe returned from Iraq to meet his son for the first time. Shayna desperately wanted a renewed family with her husband at the helm. But her dreams were soon dashed.
We fought constantly. I just thought, it's just another rough patch. Marriages have these, and we'll get through it.
In June, Joe's 4-year commitment to the Army was up, and when it came time for re-enlistment, he decided to part ways. But as the months went by with no sign of Joe looking for work, Shayna could feel her marriage slipping away. And in the summer of 2006, she would finally understand why.
Zach was 3 years old, and he just told me, he says, "Mommy, while you're at work, this blonde lady comes to see Daddy." When she comes over, I get told to go play in my room, and her and Daddy go in y'all's room and shut the door.
Shayna immediately confronted Joe, who insisted that it was all make-believe.
Joe just stated, he's a child. He's gonna make up stories.
Shayna decided that Joe deserved one last shot. And in early 2007, Joe came through for his family when he landed a new job.
I felt very relieved because I thought he's gonna start being the husband that he was when I married him. He's gonna start being the best friend that I had growing up.
But just weeks into the job, Shayna received a surprising phone call.
I got a call from his boss one night saying that Joe would not come in or clocked in yet. And I told his boss, I said, well, he left here at 9:30 to come to work, so I don't know why he's not there yet.
Since Joe had the family car, Shayna called her friend Amy for help.
So we started driving by friends' houses that I thought he might be at instead of going to work until I ran across one friend's house that we used to go to school with. And there was my car in her driveway. I was done. I said, that's it.
I was kind of hoping that he would be better than that, but unfortunately he wasn't.
On January 27th, 2007, exactly 2 years after Jade's death, Shayna kicked Joe out for good. Over the next 2 years, Joe re-enlisted in the military and was deployed once again to Iraq. As Shayna continued with the separation, she met and started dating a caring man named Joshua. But in June of 2010, Shayna's fairy tale would take another unthinkable turn. One afternoon, when her 7-year-old son Zach came home from school visibly upset, Shayna decided to confront him.
He just told me that someone had touched him, and he just started crying, and he was just like, "Mommy, when you were working, Daddy Joe would do this to me." I was shocked. I didn't know how to feel.
If Joe had molested Zach, Shayna wondered if her other children had been victims of the same heinous crime. And if Joe was capable of assaulting his own stepson, what else could he possibly have gotten away with?
Jade immediately came to mind. I said, I want my daughter's death investigation reopened.
Shayna felt the blood drain from her face as she picked up the phone and dialed 911.
To me, this seemed to be a very heinous crime.
I just heard Shayna yell, "I want that bastard to get the death penalty."
If you have a story of marriage gone wrong and would like to appear on this series, go to investigation.discovery.com. In June of 2010, Shayna Gibson was heartbroken after a shocking confession from her son, Zach. The 7-year-old had come clean about sexual abuse at the hands of Shayna's ex-husband, Joe Alsop.
I was shocked. I didn't know how to feel. So I just picked up the phone and I called the cops.
The police department responded immediately and asked Shayna to bring Zach in for questioning.
Zach was still very adamant, Daddy Joe has done this to me. So the investigators investigated Joe all summer long while he spent the rest of his tour in Iraq.
The search would not be in vain, as detectives uncovered a sealed document from Joe's past.
The officer told me that he was convicted at the age of 14 of sexual assault on a child.
Shayna's mind was spinning. How could Joe have kept this a secret? And then Shayna remembered something from her childhood. The one summer Joe hadn't come to stay in Texas was the summer he had turned 14.
He was supposed to have been registered sex offender in the state of Texas and his home state, which he never was.
There are some juveniles who are able to steal their records, and sometimes that information isn't known.
I was devastated. I thought, this is not the person I knew. This is not the person I married.
Joe's childhood secret was now police evidence. And with Joe due back from Iraq in one short month, officers decided it was best to wait and interview him in person.
When Joe came home in July of 2010, they picked him up, and Joe went without a fight.
It wasn't long before Joe broke. On August 16th, Shayna received a life-changing phone call.
The investigator called me at like 7:30 or 8 o'clock in the morning, and he tells me Joe has written a 12-page confession on everything he has ever done to both of your boys, your daughter, and several children outside of the family.
Horror set in as Shayna's mind flashed back to events from the past. Joe had confessed to sexually abusing Jade, but Shayna wondered if there could be more to his story.
I think if he can do this to my children, to his own children, who's to say he couldn't kill my daughter?
Just 2 days later, on August 18th, 2010, police confirmed Shayna's worst fears.
He finally gave in and wrote down another confession of what he did to Jade.
Mr. Alsop confessed to touching his daughter, and it started a process in which his daughter started to choke. She subsequently had her airway closed, and she basically died from not being able to breathe. After that, Mr. Alsop then put on an act of picking his daughter up, calling Shayna, saying that she needed to call 911, something was wrong, and at that particular time, 911 was called.
When officers asked Shayna what punishment prosecutors should seek against Joe, she didn't think twice.
I'm not an evil person, but if I could choose the right penalty for him, it would have to be death row.
As the weeks dragged by, the prosecution's capital murder charge against Joe Alsop seemed riskier by the day.
Given the complexity of the matter and what has to be proven in the capital murder case, we came to the conclusion that if he was willing to plea and be locked in prison without the possibility of parole for the rest of his life, that would be sufficient punishment for him. And also, that would be a way that Shayna wouldn't have to relive everything through trial.
In September 2011, the prosecution agreed to drop the capital murder charge if Joe would plead guilty to 2 counts of aggravated sexual assault on a child.
I went to the sentencing date, and Joe was cold. His eyes were black. He was heartless. He had absolutely no emotion.
On February 28, 2012, Joe Alsop took the plea deal and was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences.
I know that at some point I have to forgive him for what he's done. And that may take a lifetime for me to learn how to do that. Joshua is an amazing blessing to my life and to my children's lives. My life today is more than I could have ever asked for.
There is an inherent promise woven into the fabric of any modern society, a silent pact made between the citizens and the system that governs them. We surrender our primal right to personal vengeance, and in exchange, we trust that a structured, impartial apparatus will deliver justice. We trust the courts. We trust the gavel. We trust the men and women who wear the uniform to stand as the physical embodiment of that order. In many parts of the world, this uniform is heavily militarized, equipped to handle the worst of human nature with equal or greater force. But in the serene, sun-drenched territory of American Samoa, A different kind of philosophy had long prevailed. It was a philosophy rooted in deep community trust. A belief so profound in the inherent peacefulness of the island that its patrol officers walked their beats and guarded their institutions completely unarmed. It was a beautiful ideal, a testament to a society that believed conflict could be managed without the threat of lethal force. But on the 22nd of July, 2010, that beautiful ideal was shattered with devastating permanence, exposing a fatal flaw in the system and costing a dedicated veteran his life. To understand the magnitude of what happened outside the High Court in Fagatogo, one must first understand the atmosphere of a courtroom waiting for a verdict. The air in any courthouse is naturally heavy, laden with the anxiety of the accused, the desperate hope of the victims, and the solemn duty of the jurists. A courtroom is the ultimate theater of human consequence, where months or even years of trauma are distilled into a single, binary outcome. On this particular July day, the High Court of American Samoa was the epicenter of a profound and brewing tension. Inside, a trial regarding a severe assault was reaching its conclusion. The details of the assault had already inflicted deep wounds on the family of the victim, and they had looked to the criminal justice system as their final recourse. They waited for the validation of their pain. They waited for the law to recognize the wrong that had been done to their kin, and to balance the scales. Instead, the system delivered a shockwave. The defendant in this severe assault case was acquitted. The word itself carries a clinical detachment, a legal terminology meaning that the burden of proof was not met. But for the family of a victim, an acquittal is rarely experienced as a procedural outcome. It is experienced as a profound betrayal. It feels as though the suffering of their loved one has been erased from the official record, dismissed by the very institution designed to protect them. Among those absorbing this crushing blow was a man named Siamo Jr., a relative of the assault victim. The data does not record his exact expression, or the immediate words he might have spoken, because what matters is the quiet, terrifying transformation that took place within his mind. The disappointment he felt did not metabolize into sorrow or resignation. Instead, it curdled into an absolute, consuming rage. He believed, with every fiber of his being, that justice had been profoundly bent, manipulated, and ultimately denied. And in that moment of perceived systemic failure, the silent pact between citizen and society was broken. Siamo decided that if the court would not deliver justice for his family, he would extract it himself. He would balance the scales with blood. Yet, the target of his wrath reveals a chilling aspect of human psychology when confronted with institutional grief. Siamo did not immediately storm the chambers to find the judge who oversaw the trial. He did not seek out the members of the jury who had deliberated and handed down the acquittal. His anger was absolute, but its direction was symbolic. He wanted to strike at the very concept of the law that he felt had failed him. He sought out the most visible, accessible representatives of that system. He sought out the uniform. Outside the courthouse, the world was operating under the assumption of normalcy. The tropical air of Fagatogo carried the routine sounds of the island. Parked outside the High Court was a police patrol vehicle, serving as a standard security presence for the judicial proceedings. Inside that vehicle sat Lieutenant Lucilla Brown. Lieutenant Brown was not a rookie officer learning the ropes of law enforcement. He was a deeply respected detective and a veteran of the force with more than 30 years of dedicated service to the people of American Samoa. For 3 decades, he had navigated the complexities of island policing, handling disputes, investigating crimes, and serving as a pillar of authority and safety. He had survived 30 years in a profession that inherently deals with the darkest aspects of human behavior. And he had done so under the strict operational guidelines of the territory, which mandated the demilitarization of the police force. This is the agonizing crux of the tragedy. Lieutenant Brown, despite his rank, his experience, and his role in securing a high-stakes judicial environment, was sitting in his patrol car entirely unarmed. The laws of American Samoa at the time explicitly forbade standard patrol officers, and those on regular duty, from carrying firearms. The rationale behind this law was born from a desire to maintain a peaceful, non-threatening relationship between the police and the public. It was a noble concept, one that envisioned a society where authority was respected out of communal bond rather than the fear of a bullet. But this noble concept operated on the dangerous assumption that the individuals the police encountered would also adhere to the rules of a civilized, weaponless engagement. Siamo Jr. had no intention of adhering to any rules. Fueled by the devastating acquittal and armed with a handgun, Siamo stepped out into the Fagatogo air, his mind entirely consumed by the need for retribution. The distance between the courthouse doors and the parked patrol car represented the final moments of an era of innocence for the American Samoa police force. Lieutenant Brown, sitting in his vehicle, had no reason to suspect that the aftermath of a courtroom verdict was walking toward him in the form of an executioner. There was no confrontation. There was no shouted warning, no demand, no opportunity for de-escalation. The suddenness of the violence is what makes it so incredibly chilling. Siamo approached the patrol car at close range. He raised his handgun and opened fire directly into the vehicle. The sound of the gunshots shattered the peace of the island, echoing off the walls of the courthouse and signaling a catastrophic breach of safety. Lieutenant Brown, caught completely off guard and denied any means of self-defense by the very laws he swore to uphold, stood no chance. The bullet struck him at point-blank range, ending his life instantly in the seat of his patrol car. 30 years of distinguished service of protecting and serving his community were wiped out in a matter of seconds by a man who decided that an unarmed officer was the appropriate collateral for a legal grievance. The horror did not end with the murder of the veteran lieutenant. The gunfire triggered a frantic, chaotic scramble for survival among the other officers present. Detective Jeremiah Wasco and Officer Fayadagata Alalamua, both suddenly thrust into an active shooter situation, reacted with the instinct to seek cover. But like Lieutenant Brown, they were trapped in the terrifying reality of their unarmed status. They were law enforcement officers, yet they were entirely defenseless against a heavily armed, highly motivated aggressor. They were forced to flee, running for their lives as the shooter turned his weapon on them. As they scrambled to find any available cover from the barrage of bullets, both Detective Wasco and Officer Alalamua were shot and severely wounded. They became living targets, victims of a systemic failure that had sent them into the line of fire with nothing but a uniform to shield them. The immediate aftermath was a scene of unparalleled devastation for the local law enforcement community. The blood of a beloved veteran stained the grounds of the highest court in the land, a stark and horrifying physical manifestation of the vulnerability they all shared. The physical wounds of the surviving officers would eventually heal, but the psychological scars inflicted on the entire department would fundamentally alter their perception of duty. They had been exposed, left completely unprotected by the state, and a man had capitalized on that vulnerability to commit an atrocity. This brazen act of murder and attempted murder set off a wave of shock, grief, and immense anger across American Samoa. The public was horrified that such a brazen act of violence could occur in broad daylight, directly in front of the institution designed to uphold the law. But within the police force, the grief was deeply intertwined with a profound sense of systemic betrayal. The anger was directed not only at the man who pulled the trigger, but at the laws that had rendered their fallen brother helpless. The tragedy of Lieutenant Lucilla Brown was not just a story of a disgruntled citizen. It was a glaring, undeniable indictment of the unarmed patrol policy. It was a brutal demonstration that when the police are stripped of their ability to meet deadly force with defensive force, they do not prevent violence, they merely become its easiest victims. What followed the gunfire was a grueling, agonizingly slow march toward justice. One might assume that a public assassination of a police officer, witnessed by multiple people outside a courthouse, would result in a swift and decisive legal resolution. However, the American Samoan justice system found itself bogged down in a complex, seemingly endless procedural nightmare. For 5 long years, the family of Lieutenant Brown, the surviving officers, and the community at large were forced to endure an agonizing delay. The legal proceedings were repeatedly stalled. There were intense, protracted debates regarding the defendant's mental competency and his civil capacity to stand trial. Lawyers came and went, with some defense attorneys withdrawing from the case explicitly citing concerns for their own safety. Each delay, each procedural hurdle, felt like a fresh insult to the memory of the fallen lieutenant. The system that Siamo had attacked for being flawed now seemed entirely incapable of holding him accountable in a timely manner. It was not until the year 2015, half a decade after the fatal shots were fired, that the walls of evasion finally crumbled. Facing the overwhelming weight of the evidence and the exhaustion of his legal maneuvers, Siamo Jr. finally stood before the court and pleaded guilty. The sentence handed down was designed to ensure he would never again walk free on the island. He was condemned to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the first-degree murder of Lieutenant Brown, supplemented by multiple additional years for the attempted murders of the other officers. The legal chapter of the tragedy was finally closed, but the island had been irrevocably changed. The blood spilled on that July afternoon acted as a powerful, undeniable catalyst. The death of Lieutenant Brown became the grim centerpiece of a massive, heated debate regarding the safety of those who serve. The government and the public could no longer ignore the perilous reality of sending officers into unpredictable situations without the tools to defend themselves. The sheer terror of that day, where officers had to run for their lives because they were forbidden to carry firearms, forced a complete paradigm shift in the territory's approach to law enforcement. The legacy of this horrific event was a monumental policy change, leading to the eventual arming of the American Samoa Police Force. It was a heavy, sorrowful realization that the idealized vision of a weaponless police force could not withstand the violent reality of a fractured human mind, ensuring that no officer would ever again have to face a killer with empty hands. To truly comprehend the profound tragedy of July 22, 2010, one must first step away from the concrete and steel landscapes of mainland metropolises and immerse oneself in the unique, deeply interwoven cultural tapestry of American Samoa. Situated deep in the heart of the South Pacific Ocean, this unincorporated territory of the United States is a place where geography and tradition have shaped a society vastly different from the conventional American experience. The main island of Tutuila, characterized by its dramatic emerald green volcanic peaks plunging into the deep blue waters of Pago Pago Harbor, is not merely a picturesque backdrop. It is a geographically isolated environment that necessitates a profound reliance on community. In such a tightly knit society, anonymity is virtually non-existent. People are bound together by intricate networks of extended families, village affiliations, and a deeply ingrained cultural code known as FAA Samoa, or the Samoan Way. This traditional ethos emphasizes mutual respect, the absolute authority of family elders, and the prioritization of communal harmony over individual grievance. It is a system designed to resolve conflicts through dialogue, mediation, and customary apologies, rather than through adversarial confrontation or violence. It is within this deeply relational context that the policing philosophy of American Samoa was forged. Law enforcement on the island was not originally conceived as a militarized force imposing order from the outside, but rather as an extension of the community's own internal mechanisms for maintaining peace. The territorial government had long adhered to a strict policy of demilitarizing its standard patrol officers, unlike their counterparts in the mainland United States, who routinely carry a minimum of a sidearm, extra ammunition, and an array of less lethal weapons. The patrol officers of American Samoa walked their beats unarmed. This was not a budgetary oversight or a logistical failure. It was a deliberate, philosophical choice deeply rooted in the belief that the presence of a firearm fundamentally alters the dynamic between the police and the public. The prevailing wisdom dictated that if officers approached the community with empty hands and open dialogue, leaning heavily on the cultural tenets of mutual respect and familial connection, the community would respond in kind. An unarmed police force was viewed as the ultimate expression of a high-trust society, a living testament to the belief that the authority of a badge in American Samoa was derived not from the threat of lethal force, but from the collective consent and respect of the governed. Lieutenant Lucilla Brown was the very embodiment of this noble, deeply humanistic approach to law enforcement. To say that he was merely a veteran of the force would be a profound understatement. He was an institution within the department. With over 30 years of dedicated service to the territory, his career spanned generations of island life. He had joined the force at a time when the territory was undergoing significant changes, bridging the gap between traditional village authority and modern legal frameworks. Over 3 decades, he had navigated the complexities of domestic disputes, property crimes, and the myriad of human conflicts that inevitably arise even in the most harmonious of societies. Surviving 30 years in law enforcement anywhere in the world requires an immense reservoir of resilience, emotional intelligence, and an unwavering commitment to public service. In a place like American Samoa, it also required an encyclopedic knowledge of family lineages, village politics, and the nuanced social dynamics that dictate daily life. As a detective and a lieutenant, Lucilla Brown did not need a weapon to command a room or to defuse a volatile situation. His authority was carved out of decades of proven fairness, steady temperament, and an unshakable physical presence that spoke of experience and hard-earned wisdom. He was the kind of officer who could walk into a heated dispute and calm the waters simply by virtue of who he was. The younger officers looked up to him not just as a superior in rank, but as a mentor who possessed the institutional memory of the entire department. He had spent his adult life upholding the delicate balance of justice and cultural tradition, fully embracing the vulnerability that came with the territory's unarmed policing policy. He understood implicitly that his safety, and the safety of his fellow officers, relied entirely on the unwritten social contract of the island, the foundational belief that despite whatever disagreements might arise, the people of American Samoa would respect the sanctity of human life and the authority of the uniform. The setting where this social contract would ultimately be shattered was Fagatogo, the downtown administrative heart of the territory. Nestled against the harbor, Fagatogo is home to the local government buildings, the market, and the High Court of American Samoa. The courthouse itself is a structure of immense significance, representing the ultimate authority of the modern legal system on the island. It is the place where the traditional ways of resolving disputes occasionally intersect, and sometimes collide, with the rigid adversarial nature of the Western judicial process. On any given day, the area surrounding the courthouse is a hub of activity, with lawyers, government officials, and citizens going about their business under the heavy, humid tropical sun. It is a place that projects an aura of order and civic stability. The assignment that placed Lieutenant Brown outside the High Court on that fateful July afternoon was, by all accounts, a routine security detail. Providing a police presence outside the courthouse during significant legal proceedings is a standard protocol designed to ensure public safety and to maintain order as people enter and exit the building. Inside the walls of the court, a highly charged atmosphere was brewing. A severe assault trial was reaching its dramatic conclusion. The specifics of the assault had deeply affected the local community, rippling through the complex webs of family relations that define island life. Trials of this nature in a tight-knit community are never abstract legal exercises. They are deeply personal events where the pain of the victims and the fate of the accused are felt viscerally by the extended families sitting in the gallery. The justice system was being asked to intervene in a profound fracture of communal harmony, and the stakes could not have been higher for those involved. However, while the emotional temperature inside the courtroom was reaching a boiling point, the environment outside remained deceptively tranquil. The sun beat down on the pavement of Fagatogo, and the daily rhythms of the town continued uninterrupted. Lieutenant Brown sat inside his marked patrol vehicle, serving as the visible deterrent and the primary line of defense for the judicial institution. He was stationed there to keep the peace, equipped with his 30 years of experience, his authoritative presence, and his uniform. But crucially, tragically, he was equipped with nothing else. He was a seasoned detective deployed to secure a volatile environment, completely divested of the physical means to defend himself against a lethal threat. This stark juxtaposition, the heavily burdened, deeply experienced officer placed in a highly sensitive security role without a firearm, highlights the profound vulnerability that was inherently baked into the territory's policing model. The philosophy of an unarmed police force operates on the assumption of basic human rationality. It assumes that individuals, even when angry or aggrieved, will recognize the boundaries of civilized behavior and will not resort to unprovoked, lethal violence against representatives of the state. But this philosophy fails to account for the unpredictable, catastrophic nature of profound psychological grievance. It fails to account for the moment when an individual's faith in the system completely collapses, replaced by a blinding, all-consuming desire for retribution. As the legal proceedings inside the High Court culminated in an acquittal, a verdict that effectively exonerated the defendant of the severe assault charges, the delicate machinery of island justice ground out a result that was entirely unacceptable to one man. The family of the assault victim, heavily invested in the outcome of the trial, was met with a ruling that invalidated their trauma. For Siamo Siamo Jr., This acquittal was not merely a disappointing legal outcome. It was a profound personal insult, a systemic failure that demanded immediate and violent correction. The transition from a grieving relative seeking legal redress to an active perpetrator of violence is a dark psychological journey. It requires a complete detachment from the moral and cultural codes that usually govern behavior, stripping away the layers of FAA Samoa and replacing them with a primal thirst for vengeance. The system had failed him, and in his distorted worldview, the system now had to bleed. As Lieutenant Brown sat in the driver's seat of his patrol car, fulfilling his duty as he had done for thousands of days prior, he was completely unaware that he had been unilaterally selected to pay the ultimate price for a verdict he did not deliver. He was a peaceful man in a peaceful territory, standing watch over a community he had spent his entire life protecting. He was the best of what the American Samoa police force represented. Experienced, respected, and deeply ingrained in the fabric of the island. Yet, his immense experience and his deep community ties offered no physical shield against the cold, unyielding mechanics of a firearm. The deep trust that the society had placed in its unarmed guardians was about to be exploited in the most horrific manner imaginable, turning a routine security assignment into a terrifying historical pivot point that would forever alter the trajectory of law enforcement in the South Pacific. The stage was set, the grievance was solidified, and the unarmed veteran officer sat waiting, completely exposed to the approaching storm. The afternoon of July 22, 2010, began with the heavy, humid stillness common to the harbor of Fagatogo. Inside the High Court of American Samoa, the air felt thin, recycled by fans that struggled against the stifling heat, and the mounting tension of a room filled with people whose lives were being weighed in the balance of a verdict. Outside, the world was a study in contrast, with the vibrant, lush greenery of the surrounding volcanic slopes acting as a backdrop to the mundane, administrative reality of the judicial complex. Lieutenant Lucilla Brown was seated in his patrol unit, his posture characteristic of a man who had mastered the art of patient vigilance. After 3 decades in the service, such deployments were second nature. He was the anchor of the scene, a familiar face of authority whose mere presence was meant to serve as a calming influence on the volatile emotions leaking out from the courtroom doors. There was no apprehension in his demeanor, no tactical tension to suggest that he understood he was sitting at the epicenter of a looming catastrophe. He was protected by his rank, by his reputation, and by the fundamental, unshakable belief that the people he had spent his life shielding were inherently bound by the same social rules that he himself honored. The acquittal, when it was delivered, acted as an immediate catalyst for the dissolution of order. In the minds of those who had sought justice for the assault victim, the court's decision was not a resolution. It was a devastating indictment of their own worth and a total breakdown of the system's capacity to see their truth. Among the crowd, the sense of disappointment did not remain abstract or internal. It coalesced into the singular, focused rage of Siamo Jr. His path from the courtroom exit to the vicinity of the patrol vehicle was not a walk of aimless wandering. It was a deliberate trajectory toward the physical manifestation of the institution he blamed for his family's perceived humiliation. As he stepped out into the light, his intent was already hardened into an irreversible directive. He had bypassed the conventional channels of grievance and had arrived at a conclusion that favored the finality of a weapon. The approach was swift and, to the witnesses, devastatingly unexpected. The scene that unfolded was characterized by a lack of warning that left no room for tactical reaction. Siamo did not engage in dialogue, nor did he provide the officers with the split-second opportunity to attempt de-escalation. In the tactical landscape of modern policing, there is often a reliance on the ability to recognize precursors, the sudden movement, the change in stance, the reach to a waistband, that alert an officer to an impending attack. But Lieutenant Brown, operating within a framework that did not contemplate the lethality of a handgun in a public courtyard, had no defense prepared for the speed of the assault. When Siamo produced the firearm at such a close, intimate distance, the physical dynamic of the encounter shifted instantaneously from one of guardianship to one of execution. The first shots were thunderous, breaking the rhythmic, tropical atmosphere of Fagatogo, and replacing it with the sharp, metallic violence of gunfire. For Lieutenant Brown, the transition from professional duty to his final moments occurred in a heartbeat. He had spent his career as a mediator of conflict, A man who possessed the rare, hardened wisdom that comes from 30 years of dealing with the extremes of human behavior in a small, interconnected population. Yet, his wealth of experience could not override the physiological reality of a bullet fired at point-blank range. He was struck before he could mount any semblance of a response, his life extinguishing in the very seat of the vehicle meant to symbolize his protection of the public. The tragedy was profound not merely because a life was lost, but because the loss was a direct result of a structural vulnerability. He was the most experienced shield the department had, and he was rendered completely impotent by the absence of the one tool that could have turned the tide. The violence did not conclude with the death of the lieutenant. Xiaomo, now fully committed to his path of destruction, turned the aggression toward the other representatives of the law who were present at the scene. This phase of the incident highlighted the catastrophic failure of the demilitarized policing model. Detective Jeremiah Wasco and Officer Fayadagata Alalamua found themselves thrust into the center of an active, lethal situation without the foundational equipment required for their own survival. They were not merely observers. They were the secondary targets of a man who had decided that any uniform was a legitimate object of his hatred. As they scrambled to find cover, the reality of their position became agonizingly clear. They were trained professionals highly capable within the scope of their duties, but they were effectively fighting a modern armed threat with their bare hands. The chase that followed was a harrowing sequence of survival instincts pitted against an relentless attacker. Every instinct within the officers told them to stand their ground, to neutralize the threat, and to protect the civilians around them. Yet they were forced into a posture of retreat, forced to navigate the courthouse grounds in a desperate, frantic search for physical protection. Their mobility was hampered by the need to find shelter from the relentless, indiscriminate fire. The psychological toll of such a moment, being a sworn officer of the law and being unable to provide even a single defensive retort, is difficult to quantify, yet it serves as the central horror of the entire event. They were subjected to a barrage of bullets while possessing no capability to retaliate, turning the courtyard into a field of vulnerability. Both Detective Wasco and Officer Alalamua sustained severe gunshot wounds during this pursuit, injuries that would mark them as survivors of an incident that should have been preventable. The scene outside the High Court was one of total chaotic breakdown. Witnesses who had been gathered for the judicial proceedings were suddenly cast as spectators to a massacre, their own safety put at absolute risk by the lack of armed security. The silence that followed the gunfire was perhaps the most jarring element of the entire sequence. As the shooter retreated or was eventually neutralized in the immediate aftermath by the sheer weight of the situation, the reality of what had occurred began to sink into the consciousness of the island. The blood on the pavement of Fagatogo represented more than just the tragic end of a dedicated servant. It represented the death of a policy that had been built on the faith that the island's culture was, in and of itself, enough to repel such violence. The tactical failure was absolute. There were no armed units on site to provide a suppressive response. There was no exchange of fire that could have distracted or incapacitated the gunman before he could reach his primary target. The officers on the ground were left to rely on their wits and the proximity of potential cover, a strategy that failed to protect them from the reality of a firearm's effective range. The event was a singular, horrific demonstration of why the concept of an unarmed police force, while noble in its intentions, had become a dangerous liability in a modern, increasingly complex society. The officers had been tasked with a duty that required the highest level of vigilance, yet they were left in a position that made them essentially defenseless against a perpetrator who had no intention of respecting the legal or cultural boundaries of the territory. In the minutes and hours that followed, as the emergency responders arrived and the gravity of the lieutenant's death became known, the collective realization began to form. It was not merely that a crime had been committed. It was that the entire infrastructure of law enforcement had been exposed. The public, who had long felt secure in the presence of their unarmed officers, were forced to confront the vulnerability of those who protected them. Within the police department, the grief was compounded by a deep, lingering resentment at the systemic policies that had kept their brother-in-arms in such a vulnerable position. They had been asked to be the guardians of the law, while being denied the means to uphold that guardianship in the face of lethal force. This realization would haunt the department for years, forming the foundation for the eventual painful transformation of the police force. The incident in Fagatogo was not just a shooting. It was the final tragic lesson in the necessity of protective equipment for the men and women who stood between the community and those who would seek to destroy it. The silence that fell over the harbor that evening carried the weight of a long-standing, cherished ideal that had finally and permanently been extinguished by the cold, hard impact of reality. Every person on that island, from the highest government official to the everyday citizen walking the streets of Pago Pago, felt the shift. The innocence of the community had been irrevocably scarred, and the memory of Lieutenant Brown would forever be tied to that moment of terrifying, unprotected vulnerability. The immediate aftermath of the shooting at the Fagatogo courthouse was not merely a crime scene to be processed. It was a societal earthquake. The death of Lieutenant Lucilla Brown did not just leave a void in the police department. It created a profound vacuum in the collective psyche of American Samoa. As the investigation commenced, the process was immediately beset by the unique challenges of a small, interconnected community. Every witness, every person who had been present in the gallery or loitering near the courthouse, was part of a web of relations that touched the victim and, in some way, the perpetrator. The task of gathering evidence, reconstructing the sequence of events, and building a case that could withstand the scrutiny of a court of law was complicated by the emotional weight of the tragedy. The investigation, led by the local authorities, faced an uphill battle from the start. The crime scene itself, situated in the public square, was scrutinized for every possible detail. Investigators had to account for the ballistic evidence, the positioning of the officers, and the precise timeline of the shooting. Each piece of evidence, the shell casings, the trajectory of the rounds that hit the officers, and the specific sequence of the attacker's movements, was logged with meticulous care. However, the true challenge lay not in the physical collection of data, but in the institutional difficulty of pursuing a case where the emotional stakes were so agonizingly high. The victim was a brother, a mentor, and a legendary figure within the force. The officers who had been wounded were friends and colleagues. The impartiality required for a fair investigation was constantly tested by the raw, palpable grief of those tasked with finding the truth. As the suspect, Siamo Jr., was taken into custody, the procedural gears began to turn, but they were almost immediately choked by the complexities of the legal system. The investigation soon transitioned into a protracted period of litigation that would define the next half-decade of the territory's judicial history. Almost immediately, the defense strategy began to pivot toward the competency and mental state of the accused. The questions raised were fundamental to the legal process. Was the defendant capable of understanding the nature of his actions? Was he fit to stand trial? These are standard inquiries in any high-profile homicide case, but in the context of the American Samoan legal system, they became the primary tools for delay. The attorneys tasked with representing Siamo found themselves in an impossible position. The atmosphere in the territory was so volatile, so saturated with the desire for justice, that finding counsel who could operate without being targeted by the public's ire became a significant hurdle. There were instances where lawyers formally withdrew from the case, citing direct safety concerns. It was a clear indication that the rule of law was struggling to maintain its neutrality in the wake of such an emotional atrocity. Every hearing, every motion filed, and every delay was a fresh wound for the family of Lieutenant Brown. The judicial process, intended to be a methodical path to resolution, felt to the observers like a slow-moving, agonizing interrogation of the justice system itself. There were debates over the admissibility of evidence, arguments over the defendant's mental health, and lengthy continuances that pushed the trial date further and further into the future. For the surviving officers Wasco and Alalamua, who had endured physical trauma and the psychological burden of having to flee, the wait for a resolution was a form of secondary victimization. They had to relive the events of that day in depositions and court testimony, continually forced to revisit the moment they were left defenseless against a hail of gunfire. The investigation did not just focus on the perpetrator. It inadvertently placed the entire policing policy of the territory under a microscope. As the investigators documented the failure of the officers to return fire, they were forced to acknowledge that this was not a tactical mistake, but a systemic policy failure. The reports that emerged from the inquiry were searing. They detailed the moments of the assault, the lack of defensive capability, and the devastating consequences of an environment that mandated police be unarmed. These reports were not just case documents, they were administrative indictments. They spoke of the helplessness of the officers, the bravery they showed in the face of impossible odds, and the inherent lethal risk that the policy of demilitarization had imposed upon them. The documentation of these events was essential, not just for the prosecution of Siamo, but for the long-term survival of the police force itself. As the years dragged on, the case of the shooting at the Fagatogo courthouse became a symbol of the territory's growing pains. It was a case that tested the limits of the judicial system's patience and its ability to provide closure. The public interest in the trial never waned. Instead, it grew, evolving from shock and horror into a persistent, unwavering demand for accountability. The courtrooms were filled with citizens who felt that the honor of their island was tied to the outcome of the trial. The judge and the prosecution were under immense pressure to ensure that the process was airtight, that every procedural box was ticked, and that no loophole could be exploited to overturn a future conviction. This meticulousness was perhaps the only way to ensure that justice, however belated, would be absolute. The legal hurdles were immense, but the investigation continued to build its case, anchored by the testimony of those who had witnessed the atrocity. The forensic analysis, combined with the harrowing accounts from the surviving officers and the bystanders, created a narrative of culpability that was impossible to ignore. Even as the defense raised questions regarding the defendant's mental capacity, the weight of the evidence pointing to premeditation and the cold, calculated nature of the shooting remained overwhelming. The investigation demonstrated that the shooting was not a spontaneous outburst of irrationality, but a deliberate act of violence aimed at the heart of the judicial system. By focusing on the details of the attack, the way the shooter approached the vehicle, the specific targeting of the lieutenant, and the subsequent pursuit of the other officers, the prosecution ensured that the trial would ultimately focus on the facts of the murder rather than the distractions of procedural obfuscation. This period of investigation was also a time of deep, internal reflection for the American Samoa Police Department. They were forced to reconcile their traditional culture of peaceful, unarmed service with the reality that they had been betrayed by the very policies that had championed that ideal. The investigative process, while designed to hold the individual perpetrator accountable, also became a mechanism for the department to understand its own vulnerability. Officers began to gather data on their own equipment needs, the types of training they lacked, and the protocols that needed to be rewritten to ensure their safety. This was not a public or political process, but a quiet internal shift in perspective. They began to realize that the shield of tradition could not stop a bullet. The evidence gathered in the aftermath of the shooting became the blueprint for a complete overhaul of how the police would operate in the future. The investigation into the death of Lieutenant Brown was thus twofold. It was a legal pursuit of a murderer, and it was a structural autopsy of the police force. Each delay in the trial, each procedural battle, provided more time for the department to process the trauma and to prepare for the inevitable change that would come. It was a period of sustained high-pressure development, where the pain of the loss was converted into a collective resolve to prevent such a tragedy from ever happening again. The legal case was moving toward its final phase, and as the evidence solidified, the defense's avenues for delay began to disappear. The case was being built not just on the testimony of the living, but on the enduring, haunting truth of what had happened to the lieutenant. When the day finally approached for the conclusion of the case, the investigative work had ensured that the truth was laid bare, and that the foundation for justice was solid. The long, agonizing march toward the final verdict was approaching its end, and the island was waiting, with a profound sense of anticipation, for the moment when the ledger of that terrible day would finally be balanced in the halls of the court. The investigation had done its job. It had preserved the memory of the fallen, protected the rights of the victims, and laid the groundwork for the most significant transformation in the history of the territory's law enforcement. The arrival of the year 2015 marked the conclusion of an era of uncertainty, a 5-year purgatory for the families of the victims and the collective soul of American Samoa. The judicial process, which had been mired in procedural maneuvering, psychiatric evaluations, and the daunting challenge of navigating the sensitivities of a tight-knit society, finally reached its climactic threshold. The courtroom of the High Court, a place that had become synonymous with the tragedy itself, was once again the setting for the final act of this somber drama. For the community, the spectators, and the surviving officers who still bore the visible and invisible scars of that July afternoon, the trial was not merely a legal proceeding. It was an exercise in reclaiming the narrative of justice from the chaos that had been inflicted upon them. When Siamo Jr. finally stood before the court to offer his plea, the silence that descended upon the room was absolute. It was a silence filled with the echoes of 5 years of waiting, of arguments, and of the profound grief that had remained largely unprocessed in the formal halls of the legal system. The transition from a defendant who contested his competency to a man who finally accepted the reality of his actions was a moment of profound psychological weight. The weight of the evidence, accumulated through years of meticulous forensic work and the unwavering testimony of those who had witnessed the carnage, had left him with no alternative. The strategy of delay had reached its inevitable end, and the court, bolstered by the perseverance of the prosecution and the patient determination of the judicial authorities, was ready to deliver the final word. The proceedings were not marked by the typical theatricality one might expect from such a high-profile case. Instead, there was a palpable sense of gravity, a deliberate adherence to the dignity that had been so cruelly violated on the day of the shooting. The judge, overseeing a court that had witnessed its own security fail in the most catastrophic manner imaginable, navigated the final sentencing with a firm, measured approach. Each word spoken in that courtroom felt like the closing of a long-standing wound. The prosecution's presentation of the case had been relentless in its focus on the facts, the deliberate approach to the vehicle, the cold-blooded nature of the execution, and the calculated decision to pursue the surviving officers. They had successfully stripped away the potential for misinterpretation, ensuring that the act was seen for exactly what it was: a premeditated assault on the bedrock of the island's civil order. The sentence handed down was a reflection of the seriousness with which the territory viewed the crime. For the first-degree murder of Lieutenant Lucilla Brown, Siamo was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. This was not a punitive gesture designed to satisfy a fleeting public anger. It was an acknowledgement that some crimes reach a level of extremity that removes the possibility of reintegration into society. The court added significant, consecutive terms for the attempted murders of Detective Jeremiah Wasco and Officer Faidagata Alalamua. The combined weight of these sentences ensured that the individual responsible for shattering the peace of the island would spend the remainder of his days confined, his liberty entirely forfeited in exchange for the lives he had stolen and the trauma he had inflicted. The atmosphere in the courtroom as the sentence was delivered was one of somber resolution. There was no eruption of triumph, for the loss of Lieutenant Brown was too deep for any legal outcome to be considered a victory. Instead, there was a profound sense of closure. The long, agonizing wait had ended, and the justice system had, at long last, proven that it could withstand even the most vicious attempts to undermine it. The surviving officers who had spent years testifying and reliving their own brush with death sat in the gallery, finally able to breathe a sigh of relief. The finality of the sentence provided a definitive ending to a chapter that had left the entire police department feeling vulnerable and exposed. It is crucial to understand that for the individuals involved, this trial was never just about a case file or a legal judgment. It was about the human cost of the event. During the sentencing hearing, the impact on the victims' families was laid bare, providing a necessary, if painful, human context to the legal proceedings. The loss of Lieutenant Brown, a veteran of 30 years, was felt as a loss of a mentor, a father figure, and a stabilizing force within the community. The fact that he was taken in such a violent manner, while fulfilling his duty in the most vulnerable circumstances, remained the primary focus of the community's sorrow. By bringing this case to a close, the court was validating that pain, acknowledging that the life of a public servant, especially one who had served with such distinction for 3 decades, carried a profound and irreplaceable value. The defense, which had long argued for the defendant's diminished capacity, found no purchase in the final determination of the court. The investigation had clearly shown that despite whatever internal or external grievances Siamo harbored, his actions on that day were marked by a clear, functional intent to commit violence. The court's rejection of the defense's plea for leniency or psychiatric mitigation was a clear signal that the system would not allow the reality of such a cold-blooded murder to be masked by claims of insanity or instability. It was a rejection of the idea that a personal sense of injustice could ever excuse the use of lethal force against the law itself. The trial and subsequent sentencing also served as a moment of reckoning for the legal system of American Samoa. It had been a long, difficult process, and there were inevitably critiques of the 5-year delay, the procedural hurdles, and the difficulties in securing counsel. However, the completion of the trial signaled a resilience that the system had not been previously tested for. It had demonstrated that even under extreme pressure, and even when the safety of its own officers and lawyers was put into question, the court would not yield. This was a critical lesson for the territory, that the machinery of justice, however slow it might move, is built to ensure that accountability is achieved, regardless of how challenging the journey may be. As the prisoner was led away, the courtroom began to empty, but the sense of change in the room was permanent. The case of Siamo Jr. would forever stand as a marker in the history of the island, a point in time before and after which the concept of public safety was fundamentally redefined. The sentence of life without parole was the final definitive stamp on a narrative that had begun with an act of profound cowardice and ended with the slow, deliberate assertion of law. The people of American Samoa, and specifically the police department, had been forced to endure a tragedy that no one should ever have to face, but in the final moments of the sentencing, there was a collective understanding that they had come through the other side. The journey from the shooting to the sentencing had transformed the community. It had forced a conversation about the nature of policing, the role of weapons in the hands of the authorities, and the necessity of protecting those who protect the public. The trial was the conclusion of that process, the moment when the system reclaimed its authority. As the lawyers packed their briefcases and the court officers secured the room, there was an acknowledgement of the burden that had been carried for 5 long years. The case was finally over, not with a flourish or a celebration, but with the steady, firm, and inevitable weight of the gavel, ensuring that the legacy of Lieutenant Brown would not be one of victimhood, but of a catalyst for necessary lasting change. The trial was the final closure, the last procedural piece in a puzzle that had started with gunfire, and the beginning of a future where the lessons learned in that courtroom would continue to shape the safety and security of the islands for generations to come. The justice meted out in 2015 was a firm, uncompromising commitment to the principle that the rule of law must be protected at all costs, and that those who seek to tear down that law through violence will ultimately face the full, unyielding weight of its consequences. The tragedy that unfolded in Fagatogo on that July day in 2010 remains a haunting, foundational event in the history of American Samoa, a moment where the idyllic, trust-based traditions of the island collided with the cold, unyielding reality of human malice. The loss of Lieutenant Lucilla Brown was not merely a singular act of murder. It was a profound rupture in the social fabric of the territory. For decades, the local population had operated under the assumption that their police force, unarmed and intimately connected to the villages they served, existed in a state of reciprocal peace. The shooting fundamentally dismantled this assumption, revealing that while the community was rooted in harmony, it was not immune to the kind of extreme, unpredictable violence that plagues the rest of the modern world. The death of a veteran who had dedicated 30 years to maintaining the island's order, and who was rendered helpless by the very laws he had spent his life upholding, became the ultimate indictment of a policy that had prioritized an ideal of nonviolence over the practical reality of officer protection. In the years following the shooting, the narrative surrounding the tragedy shifted from one of raw, immediate horror to one of systemic reflection. The legal process, as slow and grueling as it was, provided a space for the community to witness the consequences of the failure that had occurred at the courthouse doors. The sentencing of Siamo Jr. to life in prison without the possibility of parole was more than a resolution to a homicide case. It was a societal acknowledgement that the protective barrier between the citizenry and the law had been fundamentally broken. The public conversation, which had begun with a demand for retribution, evolved into a deeper, more sophisticated debate about what it meant to provide security in a modern territory. The question was no longer just about how to punish the person who pulled the trigger. It was about how to ensure that no officer would ever again be placed in the untenable position of facing a lethal threat with empty hands. The transition to an armed police force was not an easy or universally embraced decision. It represented a departure from the deeply ingrained, cultural approach to law enforcement that had been a hallmark of American Samoan identity for generations. For many, the idea of officers carrying firearms was synonymous with the alienation and militarization they witnessed in mainland American news cycles. There was a legitimate fear that the introduction of lethal weapons would change the relationship between the police and the public, creating a distance where there had previously been a community bond. Yet, the evidence of the Fagatogo shooting was impossible to ignore. The images of the wounded officers, the memory of the lieutenant's final moments, and the realization that they had been unable to mount even a basic defense against a murderer provided an irrefutable argument for change. The tragedy had demonstrated that when the threat of violence is real, the absence of defensive tools does not lead to peace. It leads to martyrdom. The subsequent equipping of the American Samoa police force with standard-issue sidearms was a monumental shift that altered the very nature of public service on the islands. This was not a move towards aggression. It was a move towards parity and self-preservation. It was a recognition that to maintain the peace that the community so cherished, the guardians of that peace needed to be empowered to meet force with proportional defensive response. The decision was born from the blood spilled in the courthouse courtyard, a painful, heavy inheritance that the department had to process and eventually accept as the price of modernization. This transformation was a testament to the fact that while the territory's traditions were resilient, they were not static. They were capable of evolving in the face of absolute necessity. The legacy of Lieutenant Lucilla Brown, therefore, is not contained within the records of his death, but within the reality of his department's survival. He became the catalyst for a security reform that saved lives in the years that followed, ensuring that the next time a threat manifested, the officers on the ground would have the capability to act, to protect, and to return home to their own families. His name is forever linked to the most significant policy shift in the history of the territorial law enforcement, a legacy that is both somber and profoundly functional. The officers who continue to walk the streets of Pago Pago and the surrounding villages today do so with a different set of tools and a different level of tactical preparedness than their predecessors, a change that exists as a direct response to the tragedy of July 22. The broader societal reflection on this case also speaks to the nature of justice in a tight-knit community. The fact that the process took 5 years to reach its conclusion reveals the tension between the desire for swift, emotional resolution and the requirements of a fair, rigorous legal framework. In a place where everyone is connected, the legal system serves as a bridge between the traditional ways of conflict resolution and the formal mandates of the law. The struggle to process the case of Siamo Jr. was a challenge to the patience of the community, but its eventual success served to reinforce the legitimacy of the legal institutions. It showed that despite the pain, despite the delays, and despite the inherent difficulties of the case, the system was ultimately capable of delivering a verdict that stood the test of accountability. As we look back on this case, we are reminded that true crime is rarely just about the act of violence itself. It is about the ripples that spread outward, affecting institutions, policies, and the very philosophy of how a society organizes its protection. The shooting in Fagatogo was a dark, irreparable chapter, but it was also a turning point. It highlighted the fragility of the peace that many take for granted and demonstrated the high, sometimes unbearable cost of maintaining that peace. The lesson that the territory learned, and the lesson that we can all take away from this tragedy, is that trust in a system is not enough to guarantee safety. There must be an active, equipped, and recognized commitment to the protection of those who are assigned to maintain order. The absence of this commitment in 2010 was a failure of the state, but the transformation that followed was an act of courage by a community that refused to let the death of its lieutenant be the end of its security. In the final analysis, the story of the Fagatogo courthouse shooting is one of profound resilience. It is a story of a community that was forced to confront the darkest version of its own reality, and yet found the resolve to adapt. The memory of Lieutenant Brown continues to serve as a reminder of the vital, dangerous, and essential role that law enforcement plays in any society, regardless of its size or its cultural ethos. He was a man who lived his life in the service of an ideal of peace, and he died in a moment that proved that such ideals must be anchored in the ability to withstand the violence that seeks to undermine them. The transformation of the American Samoa police force stands as a living monument to his service, a permanent change in the way the islands protect their future. Every officer who clips a firearm to their belt today, every security protocol that is now practiced in the courthouse, and every defensive training session that takes place at the academy is a part of the long, ongoing response to the tragedy of 2010. The silence that once characterized the unarmed patrol has been replaced by a more professional, more secure, and more realistic approach to the realities of the modern world. The tragedy did not break the spirit of the force. It forged it anew in the fire of an incredibly difficult, deeply personal loss, ensuring that the legacy of those who serve would be one of strength and enduring protection for all of the people who call American Samoa home. This is the truth of the incident, a story of pain, transformation, and the unyielding necessity of duty, forever etched into the history of the South Pacific. The legacy of Lieutenant Lucilla Brown is not merely etched in the granite of a memorial or preserved in the official records of the American Samoa Police Department, but is woven into the very fabric of how the territory now understands the concepts of sacrifice, duty, and protection. Looking back from the vantage point of the present, the events of July 22, 2010, serve as a mirror through which the island can observe its own evolution. The transition from a society that viewed weaponry as an alien, antagonistic force to one that recognizes it as a necessary instrument of public safety is a journey that required a catastrophic catalyst. That catalyst was the death of a man who represented the best of the old order, a detective who believed that his presence and his reputation were sufficient to command respect. His death served as the brutal, undeniable demonstration that such beliefs, while inherently noble, could not serve as a shield against the absolute nature of human violence. The emotional resonance of this case has not faded, even after more than a decade of institutional change. It remains a shared, collective memory for the people of American Samoa, a touchstone that marks the boundary between the relative innocence of the past and the complex, guarded reality of the present. When officers today patrol the streets of Fagatogo or stand guard at the High Court, they carry with them the weight of the history that preceded their arrival. They are the beneficiaries of a system that was reformed in the wake of tragedy, a system that now acknowledges the fundamental truth that a police officer, stripped of the means to defend themselves, is not a symbol of peace, but an invitation to chaos. This institutional wisdom was purchased at the highest possible price, and it remains a core pillar of the police academy's ethos, a reminder that safety is not a passive state, but an active, constant effort. The broader cultural implications of the shooting also remain a topic of quiet, deep reflection. American Samoa is a place that prides itself on its FAA Samoa, the traditional way of life that prioritizes kinship, mediation, and communal harmony. The challenge for the territory has always been to reconcile this ancient ethos with the requirements of a modern, territorial government under the jurisdiction of the United States. The 2010 shooting was a moment of profound dissonance where these two worlds collided. It forced the island to consider whether its traditional approaches were sufficient in an era of global connectivity and increasing social complexity. The resolution of that crisis, the legal conviction of the perpetrator and the subsequent arming of the police, represented a maturation of the territory's identity. It was a recognition that to preserve their culture and their peace, the islanders had to be prepared to defend them against the forces that would seek to exploit their vulnerability. Moreover, the process of healing for the surviving officers and the family of Lieutenant Brown is a story that continues to resonate on a personal level within the community. The path to closure is never a straight line, and for those who were present at the scene, the memory of that day remains a persistent, undeniable part of their lives. The bravery of Detective Jeremiah Wasco and Officer Fayadagata Alalamua, who were forced to flee for their lives while unarmed, is now recognized as a standard of endurance in the face of impossible odds. Their survival, despite the severity of their injuries, is a testament to the resilience of those who serve, and their continued contributions to the department serve as a living link to the events of 2010. They stand as a testament to the fact that while the law may have been flawed, the individuals who served under it were not, and their courage deserves a place of honor in the narrative of the island. The transformation of the police department itself has been comprehensive. Beyond the introduction of firearms, there have been shifts in training, tactics, and operational protocols that prioritize situational awareness and tactical superiority. The department of today is vastly more professionalized and better equipped than it was 15 years ago. This is not to say that the community-focused nature of the police has been lost. Rather, it has been augmented. The goal of the modern department is to combine the deep, historical roots of communal connection with the technical, tactical capabilities required for contemporary law enforcement. It is a synthesis that recognizes that the best way to serve the people of American Samoa is to ensure the safety of those who protect them, creating a secure environment where the traditional ways of the island can continue to thrive. The legal journey that finally ended in 2015 also continues to provide a blueprint for how the territory approaches justice in the face of intense, high-profile trauma. The 5-year delay that characterized the prosecution of Siamo Jr. remains a point of critique, a reminder of the fragility of the justice system when confronted with the logistical and political realities of a small island. It serves as a lesson for future administrators and legal scholars on the importance of prioritizing the efficiency of the judicial process, not just for the sake of the law, but for the sake of the victims and the community at large. The commitment shown by the courts in the final years of the trial to ensure that the verdict was bulletproof remains a standard of judicial integrity, even if the road to that point was paved with frustration and grief. As we conclude the reflection on this tragedy, it is important to acknowledge that the memory of Lieutenant Lucilla Brown is, at its core, a call to vigilance. His life of service, spanning 3 decades, was a demonstration of a deep, unwavering commitment to his people. His death, while tragic and preventable, serves as an eternal reminder that the cost of inaction is too high to bear. The narrative of his life and his loss is a testament to the fact that while we cannot always predict the onset of violence, we can prepare for it, and we must do so with the understanding that those we place on the front lines deserve our full support. The Fagatogo Courthouse, now a place that operates with heightened security and a more realistic understanding of risk, continues to function as the seat of justice, but it does so under the shadow of what occurred on that summer day. Every time a citizen enters the courthouse to seek redress for their own grievances, every time a lawyer pleads a case, and every time a judge delivers a verdict, the memory of that 2010 shooting is implicitly present. It is a reminder that the system exists because of the trust placed in it, and that such trust is a fragile, valuable asset that must be protected. The changes that have been made in the territory were not just logistical. They were symbolic acts of recommitting to the rule of law. They have ensured that the law is not just a concept written on paper, but a tangible, defensible reality that serves as the bedrock for the future of American Samoa. Looking forward, the lessons of this case remain essential. The world is constantly changing, and the challenges faced by small, isolated territories like American Samoa are becoming more complex. The ability to remain true to one's culture while adopting the necessary tools for modern governance is a delicate, ongoing task. The shooting of Lieutenant Brown is a permanent, indelible part of that task. It is a story that should be told, not to sensationalize the violence, but to honor the sacrifice and to ensure that the hard-won wisdom of that period is never forgotten. It is a story that emphasizes the importance of community, the necessity of preparation, and the enduring strength of those who stand in the face of chaos to protect the peace. Ultimately, the story of Lieutenant Lucilla Brown is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of profound, sudden tragedy. It is a narrative that moves from a point of vulnerability and loss to a position of strength and structural integrity. The territory of American Samoa is a different place today than it was in 2010, and it is a stronger, more prepared place because of the way it chose to respond to the darkness that visited it that afternoon. The memory of the lieutenant and the legacy of his service continue to guide the efforts of those who work to maintain peace and justice on the islands, providing a light that persists even in the wake of the most devastating of storms. His sacrifice was not in vain, for it became the bedrock of a safer, more resilient future for the entire community, a legacy that will endure as long as there are those who are willing to stand in the gap and serve the common good with the same dedication and honor that he displayed throughout his distinguished 30-year career. The history of the South Pacific is long and storied, but the chapter that began in Fagatogo in 2010 is one that will forever stand as a monument to the necessity of change and the enduring power of justice, ensuring that the light of the islands, once dimmed by the loss of one of its finest sons, now burns with a new defensive and resolute clarity that protects the heart of the community for all the generations to come. The final chapters of this somber chronicle must necessarily focus on the lasting transformation of the collective conscience in American Samoa, for the murder of Lieutenant Lucilla Brown was more than a procedural failure or a tactical oversight. It was a profound ontological shift in how the territory conceived of its own safety. When the dust finally settled on the legal proceedings and the long-delayed justice was served in 2015, the territory was left to reconcile its traditional values with the harsh necessity of modern security protocols. This reconciliation was not an admission of defeat, but an assertion of maturity. It represented a recognition that the preservation of FAA Samoa, the fundamental cultural framework of the island, required a secure environment, and that a secure environment could no longer be maintained by sentiment alone. The transition toward an armed police force was an acknowledgement that the peace of the island, while beautiful and cherished, was a delicate entity that required robust defense against the unpredictable volatility of the modern era. This realization has permeated every layer of the law enforcement infrastructure in the years since the 2010 shooting. The training academies have evolved, incorporating rigorous tactical simulations that were previously unthinkable, ensuring that officers are not only prepared for the standard duties of their role, but are ready to engage in the event of an active, lethal threat. The focus on situational awareness, the development of defensive protocols, and the integration of modern protective gear have fundamentally altered the daily experience of an officer on the beat. They are no longer the vulnerable figures they once were, operating on the dangerous assumption of universal civility. Instead, they are professionals who understand the inherent risks of their calling and are equipped to mitigate them with the appropriate level of force. This professionalism is the true legacy of the tragedy, a commitment to ensuring that the heroism of officers like Lieutenant Brown is complemented by the tools necessary for their survival. Beyond the logistical changes, there has been a profound change in the public's relationship with the police. The initial shock and horror of the event gave way to a deepened respect for the officers who continue to stand on the front lines. The community now understands the dangers that their police force faces, and there is a renewed appreciation for the sacrifice required by such a role. The emotional connection between the islanders and their officers remains as strong as ever, but it is now tempered by a pragmatic understanding of the realities of law enforcement. The police are still seen as part of the community, as brothers and sisters, as neighbors and friends, but there is now a collective recognition that the badge they wear is a symbol of authority that carries a heavy, life-altering burden. This nuanced understanding is what keeps the social contract of the island intact, providing a foundation for a future that is both traditional and secure. The memory of the Fagatogo courthouse, once a place that embodied the vulnerability of the old system, has also been redefined. It is still the center of justice for the territory, but it now operates with a heightened level of awareness and security that speaks to the lessons learned from that summer day. The court is a place of solemn procedure, but it is also a place that bears witness to the territory's commitment to the rule of law. Every individual who enters the building, whether as an attorney, a juror, or a citizen seeking resolution, does so in a space that has been hardened by experience. The courthouse now stands as a symbol of resilience, a testament to the fact that the legal system of American Samoa can navigate the most traumatic of challenges and emerge stronger and more steadfast. The lessons of the 2010 incident are baked into the very culture of the building, ensuring that the dignity of the law is protected by a vigilant and prepared presence. The story of the victims, Lieutenant Lucilla Brown, Detective Jeremiah Wasco, and Officer Fayadagata Alalamua, remains a powerful narrative of service and courage. Their experiences have been documented in the annals of the department, serving as a pedagogical tool for future generations of officers. By studying the events of that day, new recruits learn about the importance of tactical awareness, the necessity of protective equipment, and the absolute requirement to be prepared for the unthinkable. The story is not told to induce fear, but to foster a deep sense of responsibility and professionalism. It is a story of honor, of individuals who stood their ground in the face of impossible odds, and whose actions paved the way for the security that their successors now enjoy. The sacrifice of Lieutenant Brown is thus continuously honored through the improved readiness of the force he helped build through his long and distinguished career. As the territory looks toward the future, the lessons learned from the shooting continue to provide a guiding light. The world will inevitably bring new challenges to the islands, and the ability to remain steadfast in the face of those challenges will depend on the strength of the institutions that hold the community together. The 2010 shooting was a dark, irreparable chapter, but it was also a turning point that clarified the necessity of modernizing the policing philosophy. The territory of American Samoa has proven that it is capable of change, that it can adapt to the shifting tides of the modern world without losing its essential identity. This resilience is the bedrock of the island's future, a promise that the traditions of the past will be protected by the advancements of the present. The legal resolution of the case in 2015 provided the necessary closure for the judiciary, but the true resolution of the tragedy has been an ongoing, daily commitment by the people and the government to prevent such an occurrence from ever happening again. The narrative that has emerged is one of healing, of moving forward, and of building a more secure path for all. The story of Lieutenant Brown and the shooting in Fagatogo is now a foundational part of the island's history, a somber but essential piece of the tapestry that defines the territory's contemporary life. It is a story that emphasizes the importance of community support, the absolute necessity of institutional vigilance, and the enduring, unbreakable strength of a people who, when confronted by the deepest of tragedies, chose to build a more resilient society. Reflecting on the totality of this case, it is evident that the journey from the 2010 shooting to the current day has been one of profound growth. The pain of the past has been transformed into a commitment to the safety of the present, ensuring that the light of the islands, once severely tested, now burns with a clarity and a strength that will persist for generations. The sacrifice made by Lieutenant Brown was the ultimate price, and it remains a heavy burden on the hearts of many, but that burden has served as the foundation for a more protective, more prepared, and more resilient police force. The history of American Samoa, as seen through the lens of this incident, is a testament to the fact that even in the face of the most daunting of odds, the values of justice, order, and community can be reclaimed and strengthened. The legacy of the officer who gave his life for the law is now found in every safe street, every peaceful neighborhood, and every secure courtroom in the territory, proving that the light of his service continues to shine, guiding the department and the community toward a future that is safe, secure, and eternally grateful. This is the enduring truth of the Fagatogo tragedy, a story that began in heartbreak but ended with the unshakable resolve to build a better, safer tomorrow for the people of the islands, a promise kept in the memory of a man who served with honor and whose life continues to inspire the very best in those who follow in his footsteps to protect the peace and uphold the law against any and all adversity that may come to pass in the beautiful, sun-drenched, and now more secure lands of the South Pacific. The enduring silence of the Fagatogo waterfront on a quiet morning serves as a stark contrast to the cacophony of violence that once defined this space, a reminder of how deeply the land retains the memory of the events that transpired here in July of 2010. Lieutenant Lucilla Brown's name, once known primarily to those within the tight circles of the local government and the tight-knit village networks, has transitioned into a symbol of a monumental, structural shift in the American Samoan experience. His life and the manner of his death created a ripple effect that traveled far beyond the immediate aftermath of the shooting, forcing a comprehensive reevaluation of the territory's administrative philosophy and its obligations toward those who swear an oath to maintain order. This ninth and final exploration of the incident seeks to synthesize the multifaceted impact of the event, looking at the long-term resonance of the tragedy as it sits within the broader historical narrative of the South Pacific. In the years that have elapsed since the conclusion of the legal proceedings, the story of the shooting has become a definitive touchstone for the American Samoan Police Department. It is a mandatory lesson in the history of the force, not because of the gore or the sensationalism often associated with true crime narratives, but because of the fundamental lessons it imparts regarding professional responsibility. When new cadets walk through the halls of the academy, they are taught about the vulnerability that characterized the service in the era of the lieutenant. They are taught that the duty of an officer is not merely to interact with the public in a peaceful manner, but to act as a reliable barrier against the threats that inevitably arise in any society. The transformation from an unarmed patrol force to a modern, equipped, and highly trained body was the most tangible outcome of the shooting, a change that fundamentally reshaped the expectations of the citizenry and the capabilities of the state. This evolution was never about abandoning the core tenets of FAA Samoa. It was about ensuring that those tenets could exist within a protected framework. The cultural integration of the police force remains central to its mission, as officers continue to be drawn from the very communities they serve, maintaining the deep familial and village connections that are essential to island life. The difference now lies in the tactical preparedness that underpins these community relationships. The tragedy in Fagatogo taught the territory that communal trust and professional readiness are not mutually exclusive. Rather, the latter is the guardian of the former. By equipping the force, the government did not alienate the public. It honored the public by providing them with a police force that could effectively guarantee their safety, thereby maintaining the sanctity of the communal harmony that is so deeply valued in American Samoa. The legal journey that finally concluded in 2015 also serves as a crucial case study for the territory's judiciary. The complexities that arose during the prosecution of Siamo Jr., the challenges in securing consistent counsel, the protracted debates over competency, and the intense public pressure have left a lasting imprint on the local legal community. These hurdles led to a more nuanced understanding of how to manage high-stakes, high-emotion cases in a small, interconnected environment. Today, the judicial system is more adept at balancing the requirements of due process with the necessity of timely, transparent resolution, ensuring that justice is not only served, but is seen to be served. The legacy of the trial is one of procedural improvement, an acknowledgement that the integrity of the law depends on the efficiency and fairness of its application, especially when the community is looking for closure in the wake of an atrocity. Furthermore, the personal stories of the survivors, Detective Wasco and Officer Alalamua, continue to play a pivotal role in the ongoing narrative of the incident. Their bravery in the face of the shooter's aggression, their recovery from the physical and psychological wounds sustained during the attack, and their decision to remain in service to the territory have been a source of profound inspiration. They represent the strength of the force, the resilience of the individual in the face of overwhelming trauma, and the enduring commitment to the oath they took. By sharing their experiences, they have helped to humanize the statistical impact of the crime, ensuring that the statistics of the 2010 shooting are always framed by the lived reality of those who survived it. Their continued presence in the department acts as a living bridge between the past and the future, a reminder of the cost of their service and the honor they brought to the uniform. The broader international perspective on this incident also underscores the unique challenges of policing in isolated territories. The American Samoa experience has become a point of interest for scholars and practitioners in the field of law enforcement, providing a clear example of the difficulties inherent in maintaining public safety in settings that lack the resources and the infrastructure of mainland systems. The tragedy in Fagatogo is frequently cited as a case where the collision between tradition and modern security realities resulted in a catastrophic loss, necessitating a radical policy pivot. It serves as a warning of the dangers that arise when ideology is allowed to outpace the practical requirements of public safety, emphasizing that the most effective policing strategy is one that is based on the realities of the environment, not on the idealized assumptions of the past. The memory of the event also serves as a check on complacency. In the quiet, peaceful years that have followed, it is easy to forget how quickly the order of the island can be shattered. The memorial services and the quiet commemorations held in honor of Lieutenant Brown are not just acts of remembrance. They are acts of vigilance. They remind the current generation of officers and the public alike that the peace they enjoy today is the product of hard-won lessons and significant sacrifices. This vigilance is the true guardian of the island's future, ensuring that the community remains proactive in its approach to security and never again falls into the trap of assuming that violence is a stranger to their shores. The legacy of the shooting is, in this sense, a defensive one, a commitment to never again being caught in a state of preventable vulnerability. As we conclude this long-form exploration, it is imperative to recognize the totality of what was lost and what was gained through this experience. The death of a single dedicated officer triggered a chain reaction that effectively rewrote the history of the territory's law enforcement. While the personal cost to his family and his colleagues was profound and arguably immeasurable, the institutional gain for the people of American Samoa was the creation of a safer, more robust, and more capable system of justice. The story of Lieutenant Lucilla Brown is, therefore, a story of an individual whose life and death helped to ensure the survival and security of the entire community. It is a story that emphasizes the vital role of the public servant, the resilience of the institutional process, and the capacity for a society to grow through its most painful moments. Looking back on this final reflection, we see that the narrative of the Fagatogo shooting is not a finished piece of history, but a living, evolving part of the American Samoan identity. It is a narrative that will continue to inform the training of future officers, the deliberations of the courts, and the public discourse on what it means to live in a secure, law-abiding society. The trauma of the event has been successfully integrated into the collective wisdom of the territory, serving as a pillar of strength rather than a point of fracture. The light of the islands, tested by the darkness of 2010, now burns with a clarity that is protected by the professional, prepared, and deeply committed men and women who serve in the police department today. This is the ultimate, enduring resolution of the tragedy, a future that is secured by the lessons of the past, a commitment to the rule of law that is backed by the readiness to defend it, and the permanent, honored legacy of a lieutenant who gave his all to the people he protected for more than 30 years, ensuring that the peace he championed remains the foundational reality for all who live, work, and thrive under the warm, bright, and secure sun of the South Pacific. The history of the territory is permanently marked by this sacrifice, and in that marking, it finds the strength to continue its journey, forever anchored by the memory of the past and the resolute promise of a safer, more secure future for all. The conclusion of this chronicle brings us to a final meditative space, looking back at the landscape of American Samoa through the lens of a tragedy that refused to be forgotten. In the quiet hours of reflection, one realizes that the story of Lieutenant Lucilla Brown is not merely a report on a crime, but a profound observation of how a society confronts the limits of its own ideals. For decades, the territory rested in the comfort of a vision that believed the warmth of human connection could repel the cold intrusion of lethal force. This vision was not foolish. It was a testament to the beauty of the island culture, a sincere attempt to build a world where the uniform was a symbol of service rather than a projection of state-mandated power. However, the events of July 22, 2010, served as the ultimate confrontation between this ideal and the erratic, destructive nature of modern violence, leaving a mark on the territory that has since become a permanent part of its historical identity. In this 10th and concluding segment, we must acknowledge the synthesis of history, trauma, and institutional change that has defined the post-shooting era. The transformation of the American Samoa Police Department stands as perhaps the most significant civil evolution in the territory's modern history. It was a change brought about by the blood of a veteran and the harrowing experiences of his colleagues, a change that required the community to accept that the protective services of the state needed the capability to respond in kind to the dangers that confronted them. This was not a move toward militarization in the sense of expanding state violence, but a move toward parity and the assurance of basic safety. It was the realization that to serve and protect, the police must be afforded the tools to preserve their own lives, so that they may continue to shield the public from harm. The legacy of this change is found in every secure courthouse, every prepared patrol unit, and every officer who leaves their home with the confidence that they have the means to return to their families. The resonance of this incident also extends to the personal, quiet ways in which the community remembers the fallen. The collective memory of the island is deeply tied to the narrative of the lieutenant's 30-year career, a record of service that spanned the transition of the territory into the 21st century. By anchoring the memory of the shooting to the memory of his life, the community has ensured that his legacy is defined not by the manner of his death, but by the magnitude of his contribution. This act of narrative preservation is crucial for any society seeking to overcome trauma. It allows the community to honor the humanity of the victim, while simultaneously engaging with the difficult lessons imparted by the crime. It is a way of ensuring that the horror of the event does not eclipse the dignity of the person who was lost, and that the history of the island remains grounded in the respect for those who dedicate their lives to the common good. Furthermore, the legal resolution that finally arrived in 2015 remains an essential piece of this historical puzzle. It was a testament to the endurance of the judicial system, which, despite the profound challenges of distance, emotional weight, and procedural complexity, remained committed to the pursuit of accountability. The fact that the process was so protracted only highlights the immense strain that such an event places on the institutions designed to uphold justice. Yet, the finality of the sentence, the assurance that the perpetrator would never again hold the power to disrupt the peace of the islands, provided a necessary conclusion to the immediate crisis. It demonstrated that even when the path is long and fraught with difficulty, the rule of law maintains the final authority, ensuring that there is a consequence for the actions that threaten the stability of the society. As we look toward the future, the lessons derived from this tragedy continue to serve as a bedrock for the ongoing development of the territory. The ability of the police department to maintain its deep, traditional roots while operating with modern tactical preparedness is a model that is constantly being refined. The integration of community-oriented policing with the necessity of defensive training has created a force that is uniquely positioned to handle the challenges of the South Pacific context. The officers who serve today are the heirs to the wisdom learned in the aftermath of 2010, and they carry that wisdom into their daily encounters, ensuring that the mistakes of the past are not repeated and that the lessons are consistently applied to the protection of the community. The role of the courthouse in Fagatogo has also been permanently redefined by the history of the event. It is no longer just a site of administrative and legal function. It is a monument to the resilience of the territory's commitment to the rule of law. The security measures and the heightened protocols that have been implemented are not seen as barriers to the public, but as necessary safeguards that allow the proceedings of justice to take place without the threat of external, violent interference. This environment of security is a direct response to the vulnerability that was exposed on that fateful July day, and it reflects a territory that has become wise to the risks of its existence. The court remains the beating heart of the legal system, but it now beats with a steadier, more prepared rhythm, reflecting the collective resolve of the islanders to uphold their values in an increasingly uncertain world. In our reflection on the totality of this case, we see a story that is quintessentially American Samoan, one of a community forced to face the harsh realities of the outside world, yet determined to maintain the integrity of its own unique culture. The shooting was an interruption, a moment of profound darkness, but the response of the territory was one of enduring strength. The community did not fracture. It pulled closer together, engaging in the necessary debates and the vital institutional changes that were required to ensure the survival of their shared peace. This resilience is the true spirit of the island, a force that cannot be broken by violence, no matter how tragic or calculated. It is a spirit that honors the past while building for the future, ensuring that the legacy of those who have sacrificed is transformed into a safer, more sustainable environment for all. The narrative of Lieutenant Lucilla Brown is thus woven into the history of the South Pacific as a poignant reminder of the importance of vigilance. It is a story that emphasizes that the peace of a society is not a passive existence, but a deliberate, active project that requires the support, the participation, and the courage of its people. By remembering the lieutenant and the events of 2010, the community confirms its dedication to the ideals that he lived for: service, integrity, and the pursuit of a harmonious society. The memory of his life is now a permanent guidepost for the territory, a signal that even in the face of tragedy, the commitment to the public good remains the most honorable and the most essential of human pursuits. As we bring this 10-part exploration to its conclusion, we recognize that the story is not truly finished, for its effects continue to shape the lives of the people who reside in the islands. Every new officer who graduates from the academy, every legal proceeding that is handled with meticulous care, and every act of communal cooperation serves as a continuation of the progress made since 2010. The tragedy has been integrated into the identity of the place, acting as a constant reminder of the fragility of the peace and the vital importance of the institutions that defend it. The legacy is a testament to the fact that when a community faces its darkest moments with a commitment to growth and justice, it can build a future that is defined by its resilience, rather than its wounds. The story of the Fagatogo courthouse shooting will remain a permanent fixture in the historical discourse of the region, an essential chapter for understanding the evolution of modern American Samoa. It is a chronicle of a moment that changed everything, forcing a necessary evolution that has resulted in a more secure, more professional, and more deeply committed system of justice. The sacrifice of the lieutenant is the cornerstone of this evolution, an unyielding truth that the pursuit of a safe and harmonious society requires constant dedication. May the memory of his service continue to guide the path forward, providing the strength and the clarity required to protect the heart of the islands for all the years to come, and may the peace that he sought to defend forever be the guiding reality for the resilient, vibrant, and eternally connected people of the South Pacific, who carry his legacy forward into an increasingly secure and hopeful future. The final chapter of this narrative transcends the specifics of the case to address the profound and enduring transformation of the American Samoan consciousness in the wake of such a cataclysmic event. For over 15 years, the memory of July 22, 2010, has acted as a silent, invisible architect in the restructuring of the territory's public safety infrastructure. This was not a change driven by political expediency or a desire for aesthetic modernization. It was a fundamental shift in the philosophical understanding of duty, protection, and the role of the state in a Pacific Island society. The shooting of Lieutenant Lucilla Brown did not merely take a life. It stripped away a long-held, idealistic veil that had allowed the police force to operate without the tools of lethal defense. In doing so, it forced a society that deeply values communal harmony to reckon with the harsh reality that institutional protection is the prerequisite for peace, not its byproduct. The aftermath of the legal proceedings, which concluded in 2015, left a legacy of structural resilience that continues to be the foundation of the territory's law enforcement practices today. The transition from an unarmed, community-based policing model to one that incorporates standard defensive protocols and sidearm training was a move of necessity that saved future lives. This is the quiet success of the tragedy, the prevention of similar incidents. By acknowledging that the threat of violence is an ever-present variable in any society, the government of American Samoa moved from a stance of reactive hope to one of proactive preparation. This evolution is the defining feature of the modern police department, an organization that remains deeply connected to the cultural fabric of the island, while operating with the professional rigor and tactical capability required for contemporary service. The narrative of this transformation is one of profound maturation. It is the story of a community that was forced to confront the violent potential within its own borders, and, rather than becoming consumed by it, chose to organize itself more effectively against it. The judicial system, through the crucible of the trial of Siamo Jr., demonstrated an ability to withstand the intense pressure of the community's demand for justice. This experience refined the territory's judicial processes, making them more resilient, more transparent, and more capable of managing the complexities of high-profile litigation in a close-knit population. The legal resolution was, in effect, the final punctuation mark on a period of intense public suffering, providing the closure that was necessary for the territory to begin the process of moving forward, with a renewed focus on systemic integrity and public safety. The personal stories of the survivors, those officers who were in the line of fire and lived to carry the memory of that day, remain the most vital aspect of this history. Their continued commitment to the force serves as an inspiration, proving that the trauma of the past can be repurposed into a dedication to the safety of the present. Their stories are not merely anecdotes of survival. They are the heart of the department's institutional memory, providing a real-world context for the training, the protocols, and the defensive strategies that are now in place. They embody the resilience of the force, showing that the uniform is more than a symbol. It is a commitment to the public, a vow to stand between the community and those who seek to cause it harm, regardless of the personal cost. As we consider the broader impact of this tragedy, we must look at the way the public's expectations of their government have shifted. The people of American Samoa now have a more sophisticated understanding of the role of the police, viewing them not as an abstract entity of authority, but as a critical line of defense that requires support, equipment, and training to function effectively. This shift in public sentiment is perhaps the most significant outcome of the last decade, as it provides the political and social mandate for the ongoing modernization of the force. The dialogue between the police and the community is now more balanced, rooted in a mutual recognition of the risks inherent in the work of law enforcement and the shared responsibility of maintaining a peaceful environment. The memorialization of Lieutenant Brown has also taken on a life of its own, evolving from local commemorations into a broader, symbolic recognition of the service of all those who stand on the front lines. The lieutenant is remembered not just for his death, but for his life, a life of quiet, steady dedication to the island he loved. This distinction is vital for the health of the community's memory, as it focuses on the positive contributions of the individual, rather than the traumatic details of the act that ended his life. The legacy of his 30-year career remains a pillar of the police department, a standard of character and integrity that continues to be held up as a model for all who enter the service today. His story has become a part of the island's heritage, a lesson passed down from one generation of officers to the next, ensuring that his sacrifice remains meaningful, and that his name continues to represent the very best of what it means to be a servant of the law. Looking toward the horizon of the future, it is clear that the tragedy of 2010 has left the territory better prepared for the uncertainties of the modern world. The systems that have been established, the protocols that have been written, and the mindset that has been cultivated are all parts of an integrated strategy to prevent the repetition of the past. The islands remain a place of peace, of tradition, and of deep communal love, but they are also a place that now understands the necessity of strength. This balance is the hallmark of the American Samoa that exists today, a territory that remains true to its cultural roots while being firmly anchored in the realities of the global landscape. The experience of the Fagatogo courthouse shooting has been integrated, processed, and transcended, leaving behind a community that is defined not by the trauma it endured, but by the strength it discovered in the process of recovery. As we reach the conclusion of this expansive, 11-part exploration, it is essential to return to the human element that makes this story so enduring. The tragedy was fundamentally about the loss of a human life, the grief of a family, the trauma of a department, and the shock of a community. By engaging with these layers, we have sought to honor the complexity of the situation and the depth of the impact. The history of the South Pacific is rich with stories of survival and endurance, and the shooting in Fagatogo is a central, unavoidable chapter in that ongoing saga. It is a story that reveals the resilience of the human spirit, the power of collective institutional evolution, and the unwavering necessity of justice. The resolution of this narrative is not to be found in a single moment or a single document, but in the ongoing daily commitment of the people of American Samoa to cherish their peace, to support their guardians, and to uphold the rule of law as the bedrock of their collective existence. The legacy of the Fagatogo incident is now firmly set, not as a point of stagnation or despair, but as a dynamic, moving, and instructive part of the territorial history. It stands as a profound reminder that even in the most serene and isolated of places, the protection of the people requires a vigilance that never wavers. This awareness is the most valuable inheritance from the tragic events of 2010, and it ensures that the islands will continue to navigate the challenges of the future with a clarity of purpose that is informed by the lessons of the past. The memory of the lieutenant and the collective response of the territory to his death will continue to be a guiding light for as long as there are those who seek to walk the path of service with honor, dignity, and a commitment to the common good. In the final estimation, the story of this shooting is an exploration of the triumph of order over chaos, of institutional growth over stagnation, and of collective memory over individual trauma. It has been a journey through the dark, but it has led to a place of greater security and deeper understanding. The resilience of the islands, their capacity for change, and their unwavering belief in the possibility of a better, safer tomorrow, all testify to the fact that the tragic loss of a veteran lieutenant was not the end of the peace, but the catalyst for its enduring, stronger rebirth. This is the truth that echoes through the halls of the Fagatogo courthouse today, a truth that affirms that the law remains supreme, the sacrifice of the past remains honored, and the future of the territory, protected by a prepared and professional force, remains bright, stable, and deeply rooted in the resilient spirit of the people of American Samoa, who carry this history forward with a quiet, confident resolve that ensures their islands will forever remain a place of safety, honor, and enduring communal grace in the vast, shimmering expanse of the South Pacific.